First and foremost, we are diving in with IWM. We ended up taking some calls, the 210 calls for June 28th. They ended up dying about 50%, even after averaging down. Unfortunately, I still held, or I guess I should say, fortunately, I still held. And yeah, we ended up ripping. And those contracts actually ended up doing really, really well. I believe like $100 plus a contract, which was beautiful, right? Our fill was 138, our initial fill, but my average ended up being 112, and we ended up seeing about 212, 215 on those specific contracts. So all that I'm really looking for is this 197.12. Again, literally one of my favorite areas on IWM to be retested. If that holds, I'd like to see 200. Over that 200, I'd like to see that 204 into that 205 and 206. If we come up and we decide to retest this big downtrend, right? We're in a massive, massive channel here. Although obviously not entirely accurate. This is kind of like the picture that I'm drawing up for me to be able to trade off of, right? So yeah, that's really all that I'm looking for on IWM. If this 197 doesn't hold, then I think that we see this 195. This 195 into this 200 is realistically what I'd like to see for the downside. For the upside, 197.12 to bounce and retest possibly. I mean, we don't even have to go to 204. Even just retesting this 201 area would be good for me too. This would be a really good bounce. I like to swing IWM for a couple either weeks or months out, as the monthly moves are great, and so are some of the weekly moves. And in doing so, I end up seeing higher returns. So just in my opinion, if I were you, if you decide to trade IWM, I would take contracts that you could swing for a longer period of time. So that's really all that I'm looking for on IWM. Next up, we're going to be looking at is Google. We actually ended up also taking 180 calls for Google, I believe around this area. And Apple held their event. Their event ended up tanking their stock right before they decided to run 25 points. But because of that, Google actually ended up having a massive wick into this 182 area. Or into this 180 area rather, and we ended up seeing 100% plus on our contracts, which was beautiful. I saw this move coming from a mile away, right? We talked about the inverse head and shoulders, and this was one of the biggest stocks for me to be looking at over the past week. I really wanted this 176 break. We ended up getting this break, pushing up into this 180, ended up breaking 180, pushing up into this 182. Unfortunately, we couldn't get to all-time highs. However, we ended up seeing, a great move on not only the stock, but also on our contracts. So kind of like the same thing. I'm not really looking for anything different, right? I'm realistically looking for this 176.50 to hold, to push into this 178, right? This 178 to break, hold, push up into this 180, etc. So our next stop should be all-time highs if we decide to continue higher. However, I think tech decides to continue lower, but we'll just have to see and play whatever's in front of us. Nonetheless, that's kind of what I see for Google. If anything, I'd like to see this 170 area retested or this 173 area retested. I definitely think over the next 2 weeks, we either see new all-time highs or we continue to trade within a very tight range leading up to a bigger move. So that's kind of all that I see on Google. Every single level that I'd like to hit is listed right here. And I mean, the majority of the time these levels do hit. 178 is definitely going to be our biggest bitch, however. So just look out for a break of that to push into this 180 level and then possibly into all-time highs. Look for a break of this 175 to probably take us down to this 173 into this 172. Realistically, I think all of those are possible, and that's really all that I'm looking for on Google. Next up on our list, of course, we have to talk about ARM. Now, with an NVIDIA split, and now with an Avgo split, and Avgo doing great on earnings, everything in between. Obviously, when NVIDIA announced their split, we ended up seeing it rip, right? People get FOMO. They want to get all the shares that they can at these specific prices, etc. And then also Avgo is a dividend king, right? $5.25 per share, now going down to like 50 cents, something like that, obviously in a 10-to-1 split, right? So ARM manufactures all of these massive companies' chips for them to be sold to the public, right? Or obviously in this case, the majority of their revenue comes from business to business transactions. So ARM ended up gaining steam off of all of these different things and ended up taking off in a massive, massive way. Now, we are currently at all-time highs, or rather, we broke two all-time highs. After earnings, we didn't really do much. It was very lackluster. But then we just continued to build and build and go and go and go. So realistically, what I'd want is a retest of 150. That's really what I'd want. 155 doesn't hold, I'd want 150 right away. 150 doesn't hold, I'd want 145. 145 doesn't hold. Now this is where it would get tricky, and we'd probably see this 140 area, 138. What is this? 138.55 area. And realistically, I think we can definitely see a 30-point move to the downside, especially after all the steam from chips ends up, slowing down a little bit. I definitely think that we can see a broader move to the downside. However, if we do decide to break up, we just have to break through what was once previous all-time highs, right? And this high being 164. So long as we break 164, we will continue higher and higher into price discovery mode. After that, just play off of psych levels in increments of 5. And I think that should be a good basis of where we could go if we continue to the upside. So yeah, that's realistically what I'd like to see, is maybe 135 be retested. If not 135, at least 145, in order for us to continue higher or, again, continue lower. We'll just have to see. But that's basically what I'm looking for on ARM. Obviously, you already know we're going to talk about it. Here it is in all of its glory, Coinbase. Now, I believe the last time we talked about this, I really wanted to see this 264 end up breaking. Unfortunately, we didn't see that. We actually saw another rejection. We saw a multitude of rejections, but we saw a really big rejection at this 264. Now, if we decide to get working through it, this is going to be a massive move up. We are going to have a very violent and a very fast move to the upside, just due to the fact that we have rejected so many times from this level, and every time we have rejected, we've sold off pretty heavily, right? I mean, this is a 23-point move to the downside. So so long as 240 holds, we continue to trade within this range. We'll just have to see, whenever we break down from this 240, we obviously break down really heavily, right? But whenever we decide to break up from it, we end up breaking up very massively, right? So this 240 needs to hold in order for us to go back to this 250 into this 265. This 250 break, technically, a lot of the time, always sends us up towards this 260 level, right? So if we end up breaking above, consolidating, or just simply retesting, we definitely could and should see a move higher. All of this is dependent on Bitcoin, however, right? We have to see if Bitcoin decides to finally break to the upside and go to all-time highs. But I mean, it's tried a multitude of times. I'm more so expecting some downside, but we'll just have to play what's in front of us when the time comes. But this 265 is going to be our massive, massive, massive level for us to have some upside. So this 240 needs to hold. Below this 240, I'd like to see 222, 230 to 225, then to this 223 level. That's really what I'd like to see if we don't hold this 240. Yeah, I mean, 264 breaks, I would realistically like to see 270 relatively quickly. 270 into this 275, then 275 pushing us higher and higher. But again, all of that is entirely dependent on Bitcoin. But that's kind of just what I see for our beloved Coinbase. Now, here is the stock on everyone's mind. It is our beloved Apple, the biggest company in the world, or maybe second biggest now, due to Nvidia maybe overtaking it. But nonetheless, we ended up seeing an insane move into all-time highs. I mean, we pushed into this 220 area right after we broke this 200 level, right? I mean, this 200 level has always been a big level for us to break, and once we ended up breaking it, we fucking ripped. 20 points at that. So what do I want to see from up here? Really, I'd like to see 207 hold. 207 doesn't hold. 205. 205 doesn't hold. I think that we retest 200 regardless. I think this big breakup will inevitably have us retesting that, but I just don't know exactly when, right? 210 breaks, I probably will play this down to this 208, 207.90 level. I think that makes the most sense. 207.90 doesn't hold, then I think that we see this 205.70. However, for an upside move, I'd like to see 215. 215 break should send us back up into this 218, possibly even into this 220 and all-time highs. At all-time high levels, like I said, it's really in price discovery mode, but there is still previous data that you can play off of in order to come up with great conclusions, right? With valid and solid conclusions at that. So here, as you could see, we have a ton of consolidation, right? We just have this range 211 to 215. We just have a big range. So either of those breaks should send us up or should send us also down. So again, 210 breaks, I'd like to target this 208. 208 breaks, I'd like to target this 205.75, 205.50 level. That breaks, I'd like to target that 200 level. However, 215 breaks, I'd like to see this 218 push up into this 220 and then continue pushing to all-time highs. It's relatively simple up here. The game plan should not be too difficult. So that's what I see for Apple. So obviously with all this chip talk, we're going to be talking about SMH, right? SMH is at all-time highs, just like everything else in the chip world. And I would really, really like to see this come down just a little bit. If we're not going to come down to this 240 level, I would like to at least see 255, possibly even this 250 level. So obviously, as you can see here, a big way that I find my levels is going, in this case, I guess, is going from previous all-time highs and, you know, seeing a big break above it and then the retest of it, right? This is the retest of this specific area, which is also a whole number, right? A psych level, if you want to call it that. It's at 250. So I'd really like to see this area, just like how this got retested here. I'd love to see this area get retested on this side. So this 255 is really what I'd be targeting for a downside move. However, for an upside move, I mean, all we really need is 269, 269 break to send us to 270 plus. And again, from there, it's price discovery mode. If we do decide to break down, though, I think we see 265 first, and then we see this 255, 256 area. If we decide to break that, then we would definitely see, you know, this 250 area again. So relatively tight range. I mean, 15 points isn't necessarily that much of a move, but if we decide to see some selling liquidity come in on these bigger chip names, Avgo, Nvidia, SMCI, etc., then we definitely should see some downside on this. My thesis for going into this past week was that Nvidia was going to have a relatively big sell-off because it's usually what happens when stocks end up splitting. Obviously, again, Nvidia is the entire US economy right now. So we ended up not seeing that. We saw the complete opposite, and it continued to all-time highs. So just so you guys have that general knowledge, however, that 260 break should take us down to this 256. 256 break should take us down to that 250. That's really what I'm looking for. To the downside. To the upside, 268 takes us to that 270, and we continue into price discovery mode at all-time highs. So that's realistically all that I'm looking for on SMH. Okay, forgive me yet again. I know there's 1.5 million fucking lines, but they work, and this is how I trade. So we're looking at Microsoft. Obviously, again, another stock at, guess what? All-time highs. Isn't that incredible? So honestly, I mean, Microsoft decides to move whenever the fuck it wants, however the fuck it wants. We've seen massive moves from, the bottom back up all the way into all-time highs. So honestly, I'd just like to see 435 hold. If we decide to break down, I'd really like to see 435 hold. If that doesn't hold, then I think that we just see 430. Microsoft tends to respect whenever it breaks down from certain levels to retest others, right? If that does end up holding, however, if we do end up seeing a 435 retest and it does end up holding, then I genuinely think we see this, 438, 440 area pushing us back into all-time highs. All-time highs come at a break of 443.50. That's really where we'd go if we decide to continue up. We just go into price discovery mode. I would assume 450 from here, so long as the market allows that. But if we do end up breaking down, I just realistically like to see 430 breaks. 429 into this 427.38, possibly into this 422. So that gives us a good 20-point range within this name. It's about 5%. So yeah, that's really, it's a super simple idea for us to play Microsoft. So that's realistically what I'd like to see, is either a 430 retest or a 435 retest into 440, possibly pushing us into all-time highs over 444. So again, relatively simple idea, and I think that this could be a banger of a play this week.